You've found just stories, simple, heartfelt moments from real lives, stories that remind us how connected we all are through love, loss, and hope. Get cozy. The stories are about to begin. Arthur Evans clearly understood that his days were numbered. He was already well past 70, and his body was being worn down by an incurable illness. He was a very wealthy man, a descendant of an old noble family. His grandfather, who once owned an estate, didn't limit himself to the role of a landowner. He went into shipbuilding. Succeeding in this endeavor, he amassed a considerable fortune. Losing everything during turbulent times, he didn't lose his entrepreneurial spirit. He moved to Europe, where he continued shipbuilding and became a millionaire once again. Arthur's father, on the contrary, didn't talk about his noble origins. He chose the path of science. He entered an institute, studied history, and then taught at a university. His mother was a gifted musician and played in an orchestra. Arthur grew up in an intellectual environment, received an excellent education and a proper upbringing. He started out as an engineer, but in the turbulent nines, having lost his job, he was forced to start his own business from scratch. Thanks to his innate honesty and business acumen, he quickly achieved success. He went into residential construction, opened a chain of hotels and restaurants in different cities, and successfully leased commercial spaces. Arthur Evans couldn't stand dishonest people and grabbers. In business, he relied only on trusted partners and never allowed himself to deceive clients. He managed not only to build a vast fortune, but also to earn absolute authority among the most influential people. That day, he dismissed his personal driver, deciding to walk home and breathe in the evening freshness. His heart was clenching anxiously. His breath sometimes caught, but the walk brought no relief. Suddenly, a sharp pain pierced his chest. Collapsing, he sank onto the asphalt and plunged into the darkness of unconsciousness. David was returning home after another side job. His main salary was desperately insufficient. Recently, he had taken a job as a porter at a small hotel near the train station. They paid little there, but sometimes clients left tips, and every ruble counted. David, who was just over 30, had to support 3 children. The youngest, Daisy, was born with cerebral palsy, and her treatment and constant rehabilitation required enormous funds. He would come home exhausted, have dinner, and go straight to bed, leaving all the childcare worries to his wife, Sarah. He loved his quiet, gentle wife very much. Sarah never complained, only grew paler and thinner with each passing day. Maybe he should look for another job. Lost in gloomy thoughts, the young man didn't immediately notice the elderly man lying by the bench. Passers-by hurried past, indifferently walking around the fallen man. Who knows who it is? Maybe he'd had too much to drink or something worse. David approached closer, tried to lift the man and seat him on the bench, but he went limp and showed no signs of consciousness. 2 more women came over. Together, they carefully laid the old man on the bench, placing a bag under his head. The women called an ambulance, while David unbuttoned the tight collar of his shirt and began searching for a pulse. Fortunately, help arrived quickly. David decided to accompany the stranger to the hospital. He had no documents on him, and his face seemed vaguely familiar. The man was hospitalized without documents, as an unknown person. David knew nothing about him, but his heart ached with pity. Everything pointed to a heart attack, and no one could inform his loved ones about what had happened. The young man decided he would definitely visit the saved man as soon as he regained consciousness and wrote down the hospital number. Despite his own worries, David called the hospital daily, inquiring about the elderly man's condition. The patient had undergone complex heart surgery. 3 days later, he woke up, but was still very weak. David bought some cookies and fruit and went to visit his charge. "Was it you who brought me in?" The patient smiled weakly. "Thank you from the bottom of my heart." They got acquainted. Arthur Evans explained that he didn't want to worry his family yet. His wife and children were on vacation abroad. He asked David about his life, his family, his work. The elderly man had a surprisingly kind face, and he knew how to listen so well that, unexpectedly for himself, David told him about his pressing problems. The hotel where he worked part-time turned out to be well known to Arthur Evans. The young man complained about the meager salary and the staff's rudeness. "Mr. Evans, I think I've seen you somewhere before. I just can't remember where. It's a small world. Anything is possible. And we'll definitely see each other again. After all, you saved my life." The doctor said a little longer, and I couldn't have been saved. "Oh, come on. Anyone in my place would have done the same," the young man blushed. It felt to him as if he was talking to a relative, a father or an uncle. "That's the trouble. There aren't that many anyone's left," Arthur Evans replied sadly. They parted as good acquaintances, exchanging phone numbers. 2 weeks later, David was completely stunned to see Arthur Evans at that very hotel. The entire staff was practically flying, putting everything in perfect order. This only happened on special occasions when the owner himself visited. The staff's surprise reached its peak when the owner, with a warm smile, walked directly up to David and shook his hand firmly. And David, not at all embarrassed, inquired about his health. The next day, the manager offered the young man a position as a supervisor, but he refused. David had never held management positions before. On the contrary, he was often mocked for his modest clothes, yelled at, and hurried along. Arthur Evans was married for the second time to a young beauty. They had 2 sons, whose upbringing was handled by their mother. His wife wanted for nothing, loved social life, and traveled frequently. Their relationship had long lost its warmth, becoming more formal. She returned from trips lively, but preferred not to talk about how she spent her time. Arthur Evans understood that the age difference was noticeable, but the lack of emotional intimacy was depressing. He also had an adult son from his first marriage who lived in America. A successful businessman in his late 40s, he lacked nothing, and their communication was limited to rare phone calls. Despite his wealth, Arthur Evans felt very lonely. Friends from his youth had long moved away, and contact had been lost. The unexpected act of the unknown young man deeply touched him. In David, he saw genuine kindness, a willingness to help, and felt an inner strength. He very much wanted to help this good person escape from hopeless poverty, but how to do it, he had no idea. David clearly wouldn't accept help just like that, out of pity. Early in the morning, there was a knock at David's apartment door. Standing on the doorstep was Arthur Evans with a bag full of fruit and sweets for the children. "I decided to visit you and thank you personally once more. Will you offer me some tea?" David introduced his new acquaintance to his wife and children. It turned out the family knew nothing about the incident, and the rescued man gladly recounted the head of the family's brave deed. Sarah, with tears in her eyes, insisted that her David simply couldn't have acted otherwise, couldn't have failed to help a person in trouble. The children vied with each other to declare that their dad was the best and a real hero. It was clear how much they loved their father. Everyone was touched, and David merely blushed with embarrassment. The guest was invited to the table. He took out delicious pastries from the bag, distributed fruit to the children, praised the hostess for the tea, and even played with the boys' toy cars for a bit. Then Arthur Evans offered David a position in his company, for now, as a manager, but with clear prospects for career growth. When he named the salary amount, David thought he had misheard. He had never held so much money in his life. Refusing would have been the height of impoliteness, and he agreed, although what was happening seemed unreal to him. The guest got ready to leave, and already at the door, handing over a business card, he said, "Here's my number. You start work tomorrow, and today, go and quit all your current jobs. You'll start doing something serious, and you'll help yourself and your family and get your daughter treated." "How can I start right away? I don't know how to do anything at all," David exclaimed, startled. "It's okay. We'll teach you," Arthur Evans smiled warmly. "You'll learn for a month, receiving half your salary." David agreed, calculating in his mind that even this half salary was several times his entire current income, including side jobs. That night, he couldn't sleep for a long time due to the flood of thoughts, while Sarah kept ironing the collar of his washed shirt, trying to make her husband look as presentable as possible at his new job. The next morning, The young man went to his new place of employment. He was terribly nervous, afraid of not living up to the trust placed in him. The boss, Arthur Evans, was already waiting for him in the company's main office. He personally showed David around the offices, introduced him to the employees as his friend and assistant, suggesting they take him under their wing and teach him all the intricacies of managerial work. The boss had unquestionable authority, so the modestly dressed newcomer was received quite kindly. He was immediately registered in the HR department and even offered an advance. After all, he needed to update his wardrobe to match the corporate style. After just 1 month, David was transformed. In an expensive suit, a snow-white shirt, and a tie, he looked truly handsome. The new manager turned out to be not only quick-witted, but also incredibly persistent. He absorbed information like a sponge, quickly mastering all the nuances of the profession, the procedure for handling documents, and methods for working with clients. Soon, he confidently surpassed other employees and became the company's leading manager. David worked tirelessly, often staying late at the office. 2 years passed. David achieved dizzying career success, becoming the boss's right-hand man, his managing director. He no longer needed to constantly consult with colleagues. He brilliantly understood all the nuances of the business. At the same time, the young man didn't become arrogant at all, maintaining excellent relationships with the staff. He and the boss developed genuinely warm, almost familial relations. They often visited each other's homes. Their children, roughly the same age, played happily together. Arthur Evans completely trusted David, treating him with fatherly affection. His family's life changed dramatically. David bought a new car, a spacious apartment near the office, and hired a nanny to help his wife with the children. And most importantly, their youngest daughter received the necessary expensive treatment and rehabilitation at a specialized center. Her illness receded, becoming almost unnoticeable. Daisy now walked confidently on her own. The parents couldn't stop rejoicing and tirelessly thanked their savior and benefactor. One day, the boss invited the managing director to his office and offered him full charge of the company during his absence. Arthur Evans was scheduled to travel to Germany for serious treatment, possibly including heart surgery. David, who had already successfully substituted for the owner during his business trips more than once, agreed without hesitation. Soon, a call came from Germany. They reported that Arthur Evans had passed away right during the operation. The managing director made all the necessary arrangements and, broken by grief, went home. Tears streamed uncontrollably down his face. His wife Sarah also cried, and so did Daisy. She had grown very fond of Grandpa Arthur. Moreover, the future of the company, and thus of their family, became uncertain. Most likely, he would have to part with his beloved job. A few days later, David was unexpectedly invited by a notary for the reading of the will. David had absolutely no idea what connection he could have to his late boss's inheritance. At the appointed hour, the young man appeared at the specified address. In the notary's office, people unknown to him were already gathered, as well as Arthur Evans's widow. When the notary began reading the deceased's last will, everyone present froze. The wife and children were left the apartment, the country mansion, and a large part of the capital. But his entire company, hotels, office buildings, assets, Arthur Evans bequeathed to the former porter who had given him several years of life, and who was now the firm's managing director. The will stated that only David would be able to preserve and multiply the owner's life's work. The eyes of all listeners, including David himself, became equally wide with astonishment. He was so stunned that he couldn't utter a single word. The young man had always believed that Arthur Evans had taken him on out of simple human pity, that his career was merely a consequence of the owner's kindness. But even in his wildest dreams, he couldn't have imagined that the boss would leave him his entire empire as an inheritance. David left the notary's office as if not feeling the ground beneath him, and immediately went home. "Sarah, can you imagine? I've received an inheritance. From the boss." "What inheritance?" Sarah didn't immediately grasp the magnitude of what was happening. "He left me the whole company, with all the branches. Me, a simple porter." "Oh, David, you are so smart and talented. That's why Arthur Evans valued you." Sarah wiped away a tear. What a wonderful man he was. And how lucky I am to have you, Sarah, David whispered. The couple hugged and sat together for a long time over tea. After this, David had to spend almost 6 months in legal battles. The deceased's relatives tried to contest the will, arguing that the company owner was allegedly insane, but these accusations were not substantiated. David himself might have refused such a burden, but the notary handed him a personal note from Arthur Evans, where he explained his decision in detail and asked him by no means to yield to provocations. The boss wrote that he was sure his relatives would ruin his business, whereas David would be able to preserve and continue all the projects he had started. When the legal battles finally subsided, David became the rightful owner of a vast corporation. Thus, one single act of kindness fundamentally changed the fate of a simple man.